Welcome to Todd's World, everyone. Beers with Jesus. We're back after we missed last week. Carrie was traveling to New Orleans.
Yep.
I went and partied with Kid Rock. Well,
Woo.
watched the Kid Rock concert anyway, the Kid Rock Music Festival. Want to hear our recounting of those? Go listen to the Wildly Opinionated News Hour. It
hmm
dropped yesterday. We do two shows. You should subscribe to both. You should listen to them both
It was a good show this
faithfully.
week.
You should like them both. You should send them to every friend you have. All those things.
Every friend you want to keep.
We're here to help.
Yep.
So today we're in Beers with
Mhm.
Jesus, and
Ooh.
we're in Acts 7.
hmm
And I'm thinking of just starting and going into it. It's a real long chapter.
Okay.
So we don't have any Brandon Lake clips. I don't know how Bubba feels about the Bible. He might be a little offended, a little like taken back, but we're gonna take our chance.
Did you hear from Brandon Lake? No.
No, no, no chances there. But so anyway, where we left off last time
hmm
was they had appointed the apostles were getting overwhelmed with stuff in the new
hmm
church. This new church is growing by leaps and bounds,
Right.
and the disciples are getting overwhelmed, teaching and praying, taking care of all that.
hmm
And they appointed some people to deal with some of the more practical matters like feeding the widows and making sure things were equally divided and whatever. They're
Right.
trying to care
The
for the
management.
body,
Yeah.
yeah. And
hmm
so one of them was Stephen. He was out doing signs and wonders among the people. Everybody
Yeah.
loved him, and then they arrested him. The spiritual or the religious leaders of Israel arrested him because it's the same reason they arrested the apostles. He's out there doing signs and wonders. They do it in the name of Jesus, and they killed Jesus because they didn't want to have to deal with Jesus. And
Right.
now here he is, and thousands of people all over are taking the name of Jesus. And what is going on? So
Yep.
that's where we are, and they've just hauled
Multiple
Stephen.
heads sprung in his place.
So there's multiple. So they've got Stephen in front of the council, and what he's been accused of is they bribed people to lie about him. And so what they said about Stephen was that they heard him cursing Moses and God,
Oh, right. They made up this
right?
story about him. Yeah.
And then they said, this man talks nonstop against the holy place and God's law. We even heard him say that Jesus of Nazareth would tear this place down and throw out all the customs that Moses gave us, right?
Right.
So they're going off on Stephen, accusing him of all these things, blasphemy and everything else.
hmm
And the very last little paragraph of chapter 6 says, all those who sat on the high council looked at Stephen. They found they couldn't take their eyes off him. His face was like the face of an angel. We talked about that last time. So
hmm
that's where we're at. That's what he's been accused of. He's looking like an angel, like
Yep.
Carrie does every week.
True. I try.
And now this is Stephen's. They ask him, what do you have to say for yourself? That's where we start in chapter 7. So I wanted to
Okay.
just let people know this is the scene. I wanted to set the scene for you, and this
Yes.
is this is Stephen's response to all of that, right?
Okay.
So this we're going to start chapter 7. We're reading the message because
hmm
it's the only begotten word of God, and it's the best. So
It's
that's
Todd's
why we
favorite.
read it. So starting in the message, it's a long chapter. You're going to have to stick with me, guys.
Yep,
Maybe
hang in
I'll
there.
maybe I'll take a few little breaks here and there
Okay.
for some witticisms. You never know.
Okay. Sounds good.
But mostly we're going to read through it.
Okay.
All right, chapter 7 in the message. Let me take a drink before I get rolling.
While he's taking a drink, I was going to say we don't normally read a whole chapter, but you just felt like this
I
was
feel like it all
a
fits together.
yeah, this one is just kind of
And then a
structured
lot of
that
it's a
way.
story.
hmm
So, okay.
Yeah.
Then the chief priest said, what do you have to say for yourself? After everything that they've been, all the people they bribed have had their words, and they're
Right.
going to throw out Moses. He's here to throw out the law. Everything that you care about as good Jews,
hmm
Stephen and Jesus hate. That's what they're
Yep.
trying to say, right?
Right.
And Stephen replies. This is Stephen's reply. Friends, fathers, and brothers, the God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was still in Mesopotamia, before the move to Haran. After the death of his father, he immigrated to this country where we now live. So this would be the Israel that they're in currently,
Hmm.
occupied by Rome, but Israel. um, but God gave him nothing. He's talking about Abraham. Excuse me. God gave him nothing, not so much as a foothold. He did promise to give the country to him and his son later on, even though Abraham had no son at the time. God let him know that his offspring would move to an alien country where they would be enslaved and brutalized for 400 years. But, God said, I will step in and take care of those slaveholders and bring my people out so they can worship me in this place. Do you have a question, Carrie?
I just found where you were. I just missed a little jump, but I got it. I caught up.
You got it?
Yep.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you. I wanted to make sure I was in the right place.
Carrie's
Okay.
back. Hopefully, the
I'm
rest of
back.
you are back. Time for a sip of beer with Jesus.
There you go. I know. I want one. I'm just having
Miller
water
High
today.
Life this week, guys. In case anybody's keeping track. Pretty common
Noise.
one over here. It's a champagne of beers. I feel like Jesus deserves that. Okay. Then he made a covenant with him and signed it in Abraham's flesh by circumcision. When Abraham had his son Isaac, within 8 days he reproduced the sign of circumcision in him. Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob father of 12 fathers, each faithfully passing on the covenant sign. But then those fathers, burning up with jealousy, sent Joseph off to Egypt as a slave. God was right there with him, though. He not only rescued him from all his troubles, but brought him to the attention of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He was so impressed with Joseph that he put him in charge of the whole country, including his own personal affairs. Later, a famine descended on that entire region stretching from Egypt to Canaan, bringing terrific hardship. Our hungry fathers looked high and low for food, but the cupboard was bare. Jacob heard there was food in Egypt and sent our fathers to scout it out. Having confirmed the report, they went back to Egypt a second time to get food. On that visit, Joseph revealed his true identity to his brothers and introduced the Jacob family to Pharaoh. Then Joseph sent for his father Jacob and everyone else in the family, 75 in all. That's how the Jacob family got to Egypt. Jacob died, and our fathers after him. They were taken to Shechem and buried in the tomb for which Abraham paid a good price to the sons of Hamor. When the 400 years were nearly up, the time God promised Abraham for deliverance, the population of our people in Egypt had become very large, and there was now a king over Egypt who had never heard of Joseph. Which makes sense. It's 400 years later. A long
Right.
time has
Yeah.
passed, right?
Hmm.
He exploited our race mercilessly. He went so far as forcing us to abandon our newborn infants, exposing them to the elements to die a cruel death. In just such a time, Moses was born, a most beautiful baby. He was hidden at home for 3 months. When he could be hidden no longer, he was put outside and immediately rescued by Pharaoh's daughter, who mothered him as her own. Moses was educated in the best schools in Egypt. He was equally impressive as a thinker and an athlete. When he was 40 years old, he wondered how everything was going with his Hebrew kin and went out to look things over. He saw an Egyptian abusing one of them and stepped in, avenging his underdog brother by knocking the Egyptian flat. He thought his brothers would be glad that he was on their side and even see him as an instrument of God to deliver them. But they didn't see it that way. The next day, two of them were fighting, and he tried to break it up, told them to shake hands and get along with each other. Friends, you are brothers. Why are you beating up on each other? The one who had started the fight said, Who put you in charge of us? Are you going to kill me like you killed that Egyptian yesterday? When Moses heard that, realizing that the word was out, he ran for his life and lived in exile over in Midian. During the years of exile, two sons were born to him. 40 years later. So Moses is 80 at this point.
Okay.
40 years later, he's been in the wilderness for 40 years
Hmm.
in exile in Midian. 40 years later, in the wilderness of Mount Sinai, an angel appeared to him in the guise of flames of a burning bush. Moses, not believing his eyes, went up to take a closer look. He heard God's voice. I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Frightened nearly out of his mind, or out of his skin, Moses shut his eyes and turned away. God said, kneel and pray. You are in a holy place on holy ground. I've seen the agony of my people in Egypt. I've heard their groans. I've come to help them. So get yourself ready. I'm sending you back to Egypt. This is the same Moses whom they earlier rejected, saying, who put you in charge of us? This is the Moses that God, using the angel flaming in the burning bush, sent back as ruler and redeemer. He led them out of their slavery. He did wonderful things, talking about Moses, setting up God signs all through Egypt, down at the Red Sea, and out in the wilderness for 40 years. This is the Moses who said to his congregation, God will raise up a prophet just like me from your descendants. This is the Moses who stood between the angel speaking at Sinai and your fathers assembled in the wilderness and took the life-giving words given to him and handed them over to us, words our fathers would have nothing to do with. They craved the old Egyptian ways, whining to Aaron, make us gods we can see and follow. This Moses, who has got us out here miles from nowhere, who knows what's happened to him? That was the time when they made a calf idol, brought sacrifices to it, and congratulated each other on the wonderful religious program they had put together.
Congratulations.
I love Eugene Peterson in the message
That's so
sometimes.
funny. That's so
God
funny.
wasn't at all pleased, but he let them do it their way. Worship every new god that came down the pike and live with the consequences.
Hmm.
Consequences described by the prophet Amos. Did you bring me offerings of animals and grains those 40 wilderness years, O Israel? Hardly. You were too busy building shrines to war gods, to sex goddesses, worshiping them with all your might. That's why I put you in exile in Babylon. In all this time, our ancestors had a tent shrine for true worship, made to the exact specifications God provided Moses. They had it with them as they followed Joshua when God cleared the land of pagans, and still had it right down to the time of David. David asked God for a permanent place for worship, but Solomon built it. Yet that doesn't mean that Most High God lives in a building made by carpenters and masons. The prophet Isaiah put it well when he wrote, heaven is my throne room. I rest my feet on earth. So what kind of house will you build me, says God,
Hmm.
where I can get away and relax? It's already built. I built it. And you continue. So bullheaded, calluses on your hearts, flaps on your ears, deliberately ignoring the Holy Spirit. You're just like your ancestors. Was there ever a prophet who didn't get the same treatment? Your ancestors killed anyone who dared talk about the coming of the just one. And you've kept up the family tradition. Traitors and murderers, all of you. You had God's law handed to you by angels, gift wrapped, and you squandered it. At that point, they went wild.
Oh dear.
A rioting mob of catcalls and whistles and invective. But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, hardly noticed. He only had eyes for God, whom he saw in all his glory with Jesus standing at his side.
Hmm.
He said, oh, I see heaven wide open and the Son of Man standing at God's side. Yelling and hissing, the mob drowned him out. Now in full stampede, they dragged him out of town and pelted him with rocks. The ringleaders took off their coats and asked a young man named Saul to watch them. As the rocks rained down, Stephen prayed, Master Jesus, take my life. Then he knelt down, praying loudly enough for everyone to hear. Master, don't blame them for this sin. His last words, then he died. Saul was right there congratulating the killers. Bum, bum,
Wow.
bum, bum. That was it's a lot going on.
A lot going on. Good job, Todd.
What do you think,
Hmm.
Carrie?
Wow.
Did Stephen answer? It seemed to me like he just got it preached. Like that's what the disciples did too.
Well, I was gonna say he gave a little bit of a history
He
lesson
didn't have much to
there.
say for himself. He didn't tell him why he was doing it.
Yeah, he's like, "What do you have to say for yourself?" And he just told like the whole history of.
Let me tell you what I have to say about you instead. That's kind of
Yeah,
what
really.
he, that's kind of what he
Yikes.
did. Well, they are accusing him of cursing Moses and God. They're accusing him and Jesus of wanting to throw out all the customs that God gave us.
Hmm.
And I think whatever else you take out of this whole sermon of
Hmm.
Stephen's, primarily this was Stephen's way of saying, you and your ancestors already threw them away. What are you talking about? This-
Got it. Oh, okay. I see. He's saying this is everything that your
you
ancestors have
squandered it. You
done.
had it all.
Right. But this is what your ancestors did to Moses
Yeah,
and his traditions or his mission or whatever.
right. Yeah,
Got
it's a
it.
very it's very now. Listen, if there's one thing I probably even to this day that Jews absolutely love, and a lot of people are like this, is they love hearing their own history told back to them. I mean, they love talking about it.
Yes.
It's like America and like our founding fathers and the
Right.
Revolutionary War. You know, they love it. They
It's
lap this
deeply
kind of stuff up,
steeped. Yeah. Hmm.
and so he kind of walks them through really the story that God began to kind of tell. So if you think back, you had creation, God
Hmm.
created, and you have Adam and Eve in the garden, and then they sin, right? And then he
Hmm.
kicks them out of the garden, and then they're going to have to work by the sweat of their brow, and they're living in a land that's a fallen land, right? And
Right.
eventually things get so bad that God just wants to destroy them all.
Hmm.
And then, except for Noah, he liked what he saw in Noah, it says.
Hmm.
And so God, then we get the story of Noah and the ark, and God destroys the entire world and everybody else in, it, and then starts afresh with Noah, right?
Hmm.
And so it's like God created, creation was broken, and God now then and then God kind of destroys everything, and he re-enters into a relationship with his creation, with man. But he starts kind of wide, so he kind of starts with Noah, but
Hmm.
then hundreds of years later you get Abraham, and Abraham's where he's going to start. He's going to pick one particular man,
Hmm.
and he's going to build out of them one particular family that he's going to interact with. He's going to
Yeah.
give them He's going to tell him about reality. He's going to give him his law. He's going to tell him, this is how I designed everything. He's going to reveal himself progressively
Hmm.
throughout throughout thousands of years to this people. So he starts with Abraham, and then it widens out from Abraham, and then he talks about how with Abraham it went all the way, and then he told him, I'm going to take your people into Egypt, and then they're going to be mistreated for hundreds of years, and then I'm going to bring them out. You know what I mean? He
Hmm.
prophesies this whole thing to Abraham. So what I think is interesting about that is that God knew the story. The like it's real clear that God already had this story written.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's telling it to Abraham beforehand. In fact, in Hebrews, it talks about how Abraham looked afar off and had a foretaste or saw Christ dying on the cross almost.
Oh,
I think that you might have to dig in a little bit into Hebrews and things, and then probably some church tradition. I'm sure that the Catholics have some things about that. But
Abraham. Interesting.
yeah, so
That
um,
God, you think what you're saying is that somewhere God revealed that to Abraham,
I
like
think so.
a
Yes,
glimpse of that into the
after
in the future?
I think that traditionally it was. Remember when God told Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac?
Yes.
And so, and this is the son. It's a miracle son, right? This is the
Right.
son of promise that God
Yes.
promised to Abraham when he was 75. I'm going to give you a son. At that point, Abraham was already past having any kids.
Right.
And then when he's 99, he's reiterating the promise all along the way. When he's 99, he tells Sarah, in a year from now, I'm going to come back and you have a baby. And Sarah laughs at him.
Right.
And then in
Of
God's
course he
sense of
did.
humor, God says, and you're going to name him Isaac. That means laughter. And so
Oh, that's great. I love that.
like, you think I'm wrong, but you wait, I'm coming back and you're going to be pregnant, honey. And that wasn't an immaculate conception.
Right.
Abraham and Sarah had to knock boots. That's my point. There had to be a little participation on their end.
That's like Eugene language.
So I thought that's kind of interesting. What do you think as you're hearing this whole story? You know what I
Hmm.
mean? What do you think of
Yeah.
how he what kind of stood out to you a little bit?
Well, I find it interesting that he's just gone way back. It's kind of like, I don't know, you ever get in a conversation with someone, you ask a question, and they're like, it all started when I was born. And you're like,
It's like,
here we go.
I was like when Tucker interviewed Putin. Remember, and he went back like 2,000 years in Russian history and did like a 30-minute diatribe of all of Russian history.
Oh my gosh. But I mean, that's what it was like. I mean, he didn't even touch on anything that was,
No.
related to I say related, immediately connected to the circumstances at hand. He just goes back and just tells this whole story. And I was not quite
When he finally
understanding.
does get to the present,
Yeah.
he doesn't say a whole lot, but what he says really sets him off.
Yeah. I know. I feel bad. I feel bad for Stephen. Um, but I mean, he takes his time too. He really just goes, it's like this play by play. It's like these little chapters, the little vignettes about Moses's
Hmm.
life. And, but I mean, obviously, this is his way of defending, this is his way of defending the accusation.
Yeah, I think he's kind of trying to set the record straight on, you
Yeah,
know,
like,
this all fits together. Jesus is the prophet that Moses promised us.
mm-hmm,
Like, and the other interesting thing is it talks about Moses
mm-hmm,
being a beautiful baby. There's a couple times in the Bible, and Moses is one of the few patriarchs that we actually know anything about his birth and how he's born and everything. And he's
okay,
also the most direct parallel of Christ. He's the deliverer in the Old
okay,
Testament.
sure.
And of course, with Christ, we know came as a baby. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I
Oh,
just think
yeah, that's
the
interesting.
whole thing is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
The way that the parallels are so thick. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
And I think Moses, if I'm not mistaken, I think Moses says in the Bible that he and God were like friends. I
Yeah, well
think.
that it does. It talks about how Moses was one of the few
Mm-hmm.
that God talked to face. He's like, when most of your dreams, visions, whatever. But with
Mm-hmm.
Moses, I talk face to face. Like Moses was, and when he
Right.
would come down from the mountain from being with God, he'd have
Mm-hmm.
to wear a veil because his whole body, his skin glowed from the
Wow.
holiness of God, like the after effects. You know what I
That's wild. Todd, that's the other thing that stood out to me. Sorry, there was so much. It took me a second, but
Oh, there is so much to go. I mean,
there's so much.
we'll just hit the
When
highlights. That's all we
when
can really do.
Stephen, yeah, when Stephen saw God and Jesus standing there
Hmm.
while he was talking, I was like, well, that's not good. I was like, it's great that he's seeing them, but also it doesn't really, it's not very encouraging for,
Well, though, what's so cool about that is that
yeah,
we're told over and over, and even
from a
Jesus said,
human standpoint. You understand what I'm
"Well,
saying.
right."
I'm
But
like,
what's so interesting about that is how that the second when Stephen was so enamored with God, and I think it says somewhere in there, doesn't it say
mhm.
that he only had eyes for God?
um, I think, oh, earlier.
No, it says
Oh,
at that point they went wild,
oh,
right?
yeah.
But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, hardly noticed the crowd going wild around him. He
Hmm.
only had eyes for God, whom he then saw in all his glory. And what's interesting about this is he sees Jesus standing and God standing. And
Right.
in most of the things we see, Jesus talks about going to his Father and then he's seated at the right hand of God.
Hmm.
And this picture is almost one of like God and Jesus are like, they're so excited. They're almost like standing up and applauding Stephen because they're so impressed with this follower of them, with his
Wow.
love for them. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And they know what he's about to give. They know he's about to give everything he has
Hmm.
for this gospel. And it's like he gets this vision, and both God and Jesus are like standing, I think, in like approval. You know what I mean? Like
Got
I think
it.
there was something like that with the Roman emperors where they would stand. And listen, I'm not the biggest
Okay.
history buff, so I'm not going to be able to
No,
tell
that
you
helps
everything.
though. That helps put it into context because I obviously, I'm familiar with the concept of him being seated at the
Right.
right hand, but that's
I think there might be something
described
significant to
many
the
times,
fact that
but
both Jesus, he sees both Jesus and he sees God, and he sees them standing next
they're
to each other.
standing there. Yeah,
And it's
that's
like
amazing.
just like they're so
Hmm.
like he only has eyes for God. And in that same way, both God and Jesus in that moment, and I know they're not confined by a moment, but in that moment,
Right.
they only have eyes for Stephen. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right. Like they're
I
there
love that.
supporting him. Hmm.
Yeah. Like,
They're there, clearly they're
and it
there for
doesn't matter
him.
that he's getting killed in a horrible way or any of that.
Hmm.
Everything, once he sees God,
Hmm.
that's all that matters.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I mean, that was the case all through. That's all through Acts. We're going to find it all over the place. We're going to find it with,
Yeah.
we get the preview of Saul, but we're going to find it with Paul. We're going to find it all over the place. You know what I
Wow.
mean? And it's just,
Yeah. So what was it here at the end that really triggered them? He said,
when he took it into the
yeah. Oh,
present
he called them all traitors and
and he
murderers.
said, and you continued, you're just as bullheaded as all your ancestors. And he doesn't quite get time because they
Hmm.
don't give him quite as much time as Peter got to be able to say, you nailed him to a cross, but that's what they meant,
Right.
or
That's where
that's where he was
he was
going.
getting there. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they knew it. They'd been preached to multiple times. Every time they haul these disciples in, they're getting preached to.
Right. They're like, we don't want to hear it this time. So this sounds like more people. Is it more people? Or is it just the same council?
I don't know. It does give the impression that there's more. I don't really know.
It says the mob drowned in full stampede. I don't
It
know. It's
seems like
like,
there was a lot of going on. Like there's, I mean, if you're gonna have a
yeah.
stoning, it's doubtful that it's just like the high priest.
Right. I'm kind of feeling like they're not going to do the dirty work. It's going to be like a,
Typically, what they would do, and I don't know exactly what they did here, but typically when they would, and the other thing I'm confused about is the reason that the high priest and the Jewish religious leaders went through all they did with Jesus, with
hmm.
taking him to Herod and Pontius Pilate and all this stuff, is because the Jews did not, they were not allowed to carry out capital punishment by Rome.
Oh,
They weren't allowed to, they couldn't make decisions on executing people. That had to come from Rome. That's why everything went the way that it did with Jesus, with Pontius Pilate and everything. And he
hmm.
finally gives them over and says, okay, do with them what you want, right? But it's still the Roman guard. It's still the Roman soldiers who put him on the cross and are nailing him to the cross and are piercing his side and everything else because Rome took care of executions. Well, but
Okay.
here this mob got so worked up that they just stoned them on their own. And generally, what they would do is they would take somebody, mind you, generally Israel's somewhat of a mountainous area, and they would throw them off something like a precipice. And then if the fall didn't kill them,
Hmm.
they'd start throwing rocks at them and everything
Oh
else that
my
they could.
gosh.
That's kind of a typical stoning. Whether or not that happened in this, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it is that Stephen is considered the first martyr, so to
Yeah.
speak,
Yep.
for the cause. I mean, obviously
The
Christ
first
died,
official.
but as one of the followers of Christ who dies for his faith, there was no reason he was killed specifically because
Yep.
he was a Christian.
Hmm.
And it happens a lot. It's happened a lot since then. Happens a lot.
Hmm.
In fact, I think I heard a stat that it's on the increase. There's more persecution and martyrdom today across the world than there ever has been at any time in history, we think.
Wow.
We don't feel that because we're in America and
Right.
whatever, but as bad as it is, it's not quite that bad yet.
Sure.
So,
I know. Like we don't really know what religious persecution feels
right.
like in other parts of the world. So it says here, this is, Google's AI overview says that Stephen was stoned to death by a crowd of people who were enraged by his preaching about Jesus. These individuals were members of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, who accused him of blasphemy.
Okay.
So
They probably
it's
got the people wound up,
right. I think so. Because, yeah, it doesn't, I can't imagine these robed guys,
getting their hands dirty with stones.
exactly. Yeah, I'm sure they were. They delegated.
Going back
Yeah.
to Abraham, one of my favorite passages
Okay.
is in Romans. And
Okay.
this is what Paul says about Abraham. Uh Abraham didn't focus on his own impotence and say it's hopeless. Meaning his own ability to have a baby. That's what he's going to say. This 100-year-old body could never father a child, nor did he survey Sarah's decades of infertility and give up. And this is the part I really like. He didn't tiptoe around God's promise asking cautiously skeptical questions. He plunged into the promise and came up strong, ready for God, sure that God would make good on what he had said. Like, I love that. He did like
That's
it.
fantastic.
That's so much of us. You know that old saying I use a lot on X. I'll post "Color Me Skeptical"
Yeah.
of like whatever propaganda I feel like I'm being
Ah,
exposed to at the time.
right.
And but that
Yeah.
we too often, I think, let our faith get hampered by our own skepticism. We
Hmm.
over question things, we overthink things. You see that actually talks about Moses. Moses goes on, it talks about Moses at the burning bush. Now when we
Hmm.
see it here, it looks like Moses just followed. Well, there was two chapters where Moses was arguing about God because it'd been 40 years. 40 years ago, he was ready to be the deliverer. He knew he was going to be the deliverer.
Hmm.
He was all set for it. He's in the prime of his life. He's educated in the best schools. Josephus, as a Jewish historian, would tell us that Moses had a lot of success commanding Pharaoh's Western armies. Like,
Okay.
Moses is an important dude in Egypt. He's a prince,
Hmm.
right? He's a leader. Everybody knows he's a leader.
Yeah, he's accomplished
It's
and
in him. It seems like for a long time that he's a deliverer of sorts for his people. It says he
hmm
kind of thought that they'd think
like
something and that didn't
like I'm
work out.
ready.
Like he
Yeah.
tried it his own way
Hmm.
and he failed. And when he failed so badly that he's on the run for his own life as a fugitive from justice, where he was a prince and royalty before,
Hmm.
and he ends up for 40 years stuck in the desert.
Yep.
I got a feeling Moses was convinced. I don't know. Maybe he was convinced after 10 years, but certainly after 40, that whatever that was wasn't going to happen. Whatever that dream was that he thought was going to happen, that was over.
Yeah.
And then that was when God's like, okay, you're 80 now. Now we're ready. I'm just getting started. And Moses is like, you're crazy. I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
And after two chapters, it ends by Moses saying, just send somebody else.
I was gonna say he's lived an entire life of, not fulfilling this role.
Yeah.
So
And he had
yeah,
to be
he's
convinced it
convinced.
was over.
Sure.
And yet he's got 40 years more. And he's going to do, I mean, when the way that Stephen describes it here, when he says that he did wonderful things, setting up God signs all through Egypt, down at the Red Sea, and out in the wilderness for 40 years. I love how he kept saying, this is the Moses. This is the same guy.
Yeah.
Like, this is the same guy who was convinced it was all done.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be convinced it was all done in a tenth of that time.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He had already failed.
Hmm.
I mean, would people even, the people that would remember him probably wouldn't remember him necessarily all that fondly
Right.
in Egypt, right?
Sure.
So I thought that
Mm.
was good. The Abraham thing is so good. He goes through Joseph. I love the story, Joseph. Every part of
Oh
this,
yeah.
I really, if Beers with Jesus, which I expect it to, goes on long enough, someday I'd like to get into Genesis and get into some of these stories
Oh
because I
yeah.
love the stories of Abraham moving into Isaac and Jacob. And then it's all story. You know how I love story.
Sure.
And it's
Yeah.
all story. And it really gives you a perspective on the fact that this was always people can have this can get the feeling we talked about this in news with some of the
Hmm.
the crazy Israel stuff that people have modern day Israel and oh my God is the Antichrist and all these things, right?
Hmm.
But I think there's a natural tendency to take the Old Testament and separate it from the New Testament and say, well, that was that and this is now. But I don't think so. See, when I read this and I see Stephen mapping out the whole story, I think God always had this story figured out. Just because we
Hmm.
separated into the Old and New Testament, this is all the same story. It's all the same God. Salvation's all the same all the way through. It's all through
Right.
faith, you
Hmm.
know?
Totally.
And that's what I see when I read the Old Testament. I don't necessarily see a God who's just like, oh, horribly this and horribly that. I see the compassion, everything that we see. Now, it's more apparent in Jesus because I don't think until God became one of us,
Yes.
I don't really think we could get it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But he became one of us so that he could experience us, and on the reverse side, so we could experience God
Hmm.
in our skin, kind of. You know what I mean? So
Right.
there's a relatability to God that was impossible before the incarnation, before Jesus became man.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely a big shift took place at that time. I mean, you don't want to say God didn't know what it was like to be us. I mean, God knows everything.
But in a sense, until
But,
Jesus,
hmm
to the extent that he did know what it was like to be us, it's
hmm
because God, in an eternal sense, is existing outside of time, and so
yeah,
he at the same time that he's creating everything, not at the same time. It's impossible
sure.
from a human standpoint because you get stuck in these time things.
Right, right.
But
I know.
in the same eternality, God dies for man at this. It's all one. It's all now for God.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? It's hard
Yes.
for us to comprehend. But I did like I love the story of Abraham. I love that passage in Romans about him. You know what I mean? That
Yeah, that's cool.
it was all
Um,
about faith the whole way. That's the thing, and that's what John the Baptist at the beginning. I think it's a Mark where we talked. He
hmm
says he says, and don't talk to me about being because he's baptizing everybody. Remember, the Pharisees come out because John's
Yeah.
made this big splash. This is before Jesus shows up, and
hmm
there's this kind of revival taking place, and John's preaching the
Yeah.
kingdom, and people are coming out to the wilderness to be baptized in the Jordan River, and a bunch of Pharisees come out,
Yeah.
and John starts calling them snakes, and he says, "You think some water is going to wash off your snake skins?" And he says, "Don't talk to me about being the children of Abraham. God can raise the children of Abraham up out of these stones." And I think he's making the same point there, which is it's not about genealogy, it's not about genetics, it's about the faith. It's about the remnant of faith that carries through.
hmm
That's the kingdom. You know what I mean? That's
Yes.
spiritual Israel, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Right.
And but Stephen's pointing it all out for him. He's just like, listen, this is you want to know how I feel about Jewish history? Let me map it all out for you. And
Right.
all the way through without even trying, although I think they're getting it, he's weaving in the story of Jesus. God's been at work in this the whole time.
hmm
And everybody who's come to talk about the just one who's coming, you've killed every single prophet all along the
Yeah.
way for 8,000 years or whatever,
Yeah.
6,000 years, whatever it is. And so yeah, I thought it was good. What else you got, Carrie?
It's really good. So what else have we got here?
I got so many notes. I like how when he says that Abraham, um, God gave Abraham the promise, even though Abraham didn't have a son at the time. God's talking to him about what a great nation he's going to be.
Hmm.
Because God calls that which is not as if it is. Remember that Lauren Daigle song? It's real popular. You say,
Oh yeah, yeah.
that's that same idea. You say that I'm strong even when I'm feeling weak and I'm looking weak or
Hmm.
whatever. God calls that
Right.
which isn't as if it already is.
Yeah.
I think that's what he did with Moses when he's showing up to Moses, and Moses says all these reasons why it won't work, and God's like, "No, this is what it is.
Right. It's already
You're
figured out.
you're going to deliver the people from slavery." Pharaoh's going to. Moses is like, "I don't know what you're talking about."
Yeah. I'm trying to find where you were just saying that about Abraham.
That was up toward in like the second paragraph.
Oh, okay.
I also think it's interesting that with Moses, Moses did 40 years in Egypt.
Okay.
He did 40 years in the wilderness of Midian in exile.
Okay.
And he comes back. God uses him to deliver the children of evil, or children of Israel. And then, because they reject and won't go into the promised land because of the giants, they do another 40 years in the desert in the wilderness. And
My
Moses leads them
gosh.
for 40 years. So, but what I think is interesting about that is that that's the time that Stephen talks about when he says, he did wonderful things setting up God signs all through Egypt, down at the Red Sea, and out in the wilderness for 40 years. So that's where Moses is doing God signs, where he's knowing God face to face. Yet, if we were to look, most of us, from our normal worldly standpoint, we would have said Moses' best, most successful years were his first 40 years as royalty in Egypt. You know what I mean?
Oh, you mean by like our
By our
standards?
standards, that was
Oh.
by far and away his most successful time.
Oh, sure. I know. Isn't that crazy?
I mean, he was a prince of Egypt. He won
Hmm.
wars. He was edge all these things,
Right.
and none of those things the Bible hardly talks about. God doesn't care about it all. In fact, God had him out in the desert for 40 years to purge him of all that, or to kind of get it in perspective, whatever it is.
Right.
But you know what I wondered is, I wondered, do you think that God still today, that there's times where he moves us into exile? You know
Mm.
what I mean?
Yes.
Where we're hidden, maybe. Because it also said when he was a baby that he was hidden for a time.
Hmm.
And it reminded me of Jesus, right after Jesus is born, and the angel tells Joseph to take him down to Egypt, and they spend 2 years down in Egypt to avoid Herod's kind of Holocaust of babies, that he
Right.
kills. And
Right.
Jesus was hidden for a while in Egypt. And
Hmm.
there's this idea that is any time God calls somebody to something that's like like a big ministry or whatever,
Hmm.
calls us out into this adventure, is there always a time of wandering and of exile and of hiddenness? You know what I mean? Is that what
Sure.
God uses in us to get us
Yeah.
ready for what he's finally going to do that we feel like is way too late and we're way not ready for it?
Right. And I don't know. I don't know if there's an actual pattern of that, but if there is, it makes perfect sense. And we certainly don't understand it in the time.
I mean, in a way,
Um,
Jesus was hidden for what, 30 years in
right.
Nazareth
Right. Yeah, I mean, we saw him as a adolescent in the temple.
for like one quick glimpse, but I mean,
Right.
that wasn't,
And then that was it. And
yeah,
then, yeah.
he wasn't out setting the world on fire. I mean, he wasn't like,
Nope.
I mean, maybe he was turning clay pigeons into real pigeons like Catholics think. I don't know whether he was or wasn't,
Oh,
but
yeah. Is that the Catholic
I
story?
think they have some stories in their traditions about him
Right. That
doing
sounds
miracles as a
familiar.
little boy. I don't
Right.
know.
But I mean, it makes sense that God would do that. And the funny thing is, to us, that time is so significant, the length of time and how long we have to wait. But I don't even think, I don't even think God thinks in those terms.
I
I
don't
think,
either.
I think that he just, for Moses, I don't think he thought, yeah, I'm not going to do this till he's 80. It's just that time passes, and when God says it's time, it's time. And to us, it feels like forever. Um,
There's
but
a
it is just in God's time.
guy, I'm trying to remember his name. I think
Hmm.
it might have been Wearsby, I'm not positive, who said, there was a quote where he said, first, God makes the man for the work, and then God makes the work for the man. So in that whole
Oh,
40 years in Egypt and then 40 years in Midian, God's
yep.
making Moses for his work. And part of that is a massive failure that I think haunts Moses for the next 40 years. You know what I mean? And if it had been up to Moses and God hadn't drug him out of it kicking and screaming, he would have stayed there. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Right. Because he argues with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was created to be a deliverer. He was designed for that from the beginning. It's clear.
Hmm.
Everybody, you know what I mean?
Right.
And then the other thing that I think is really good is how he says, listen, he gave you these life-giving words and your ancestors, your fathers didn't want anything to do with it. Don't try to sit here and say that Jesus is the one who's trying to subvert Moses. You guys haven't wanted anything to do with Moses or any of the life-giving words of the law of God that he gave you ever since he gave them. You've
Well,
been rejecting, you've been killing every prophet that comes to you.
hmm.
The problem isn't Jesus, the problem's you. That's what
Yeah.
he's saying.
Oh, yeah. He calls them out completely.
And it's hard not to. I did love that line where they were all congratulating themselves on the calf.
Yes.
You know the story he's talking about. Moses has been up on Mount Sinai for,
Yeah.
they crossed the Red Sea and
Hmm.
they're in the, God delivered them miraculously from Egypt. Now they're in the
Right.
middle of the desert, and then
Right.
Moses disappears up this mountain for like 40 days.
I was going to say it was quite a
He's just
time.
gone.
And while he's up there, that is when, um, is that when God gives him the
The Ten Commandments.
commandments?
Yeah.
Okay. And but yeah, when the people like have lost hope. They don't know
Right.
why he's gone, and they've just completely lost sight of their whole mission, and they just fall back into their old
Well, and
ways.
they tell Aaron, listen, we're going to give you all these earrings, all this gold, make us this gold calf. And they go right back to it.
Yep.
They go right back to the religion, the only religion any of these people have ever known.
Hmm.
All they've ever known is Egypt.
Right. I
I
mean,
mean, it's
it's
been
easy to
400
judge them.
years.
It's easy to judge them, but it's all they know, and they just fall right back into their old ways.
And the guy that they believed
Yeah.
in who let them out of slavery, now they're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
They're in the
And
middle of
and he's
uncertainty
and he's
completely.
MIA.
And he just disappears. He's gone
Yeah.
for 40 days. I mean, maybe the first
Right.
like week or two, you're like, well, I mean, it probably takes a little while. I don't know.
I don't remember if he gave them an explanation or anything, if he said he was going to go up the
I don't
mountain to
think he
pray
knew.
or anything.
Yeah, I don't. He just
Okay.
was going up to meet with God,
Oh my
and
gosh.
then and so
But yeah,
and
so he comes down.
while this is while Moses is up there and God's
Hmm.
giving him the specifics on the kind of robes that the priests are going to wear and how he's chosen Aaron to be the person that God has chosen to be the high priest
Yeah.
is down there and he's got the entire congregation dancing naked around a golden calf.
Oh my gosh.
So that not only did you have this massive failure that Moses had 40 years earlier, right at the beginning of this priesthood that God is setting up,
Hmm.
the person who's going to be the high priest has a
Hmm.
massive failure right at the beginning. What's
Right.
significant about that? What's significant is there was no chance in Aaron becoming arrogant. When the people came to him to sacrifice for their sins, he felt it every time.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's why
Yeah,
when it
that's
talks in
true.
Hebrews about Jesus, it says we don't have a high priest who can't be touched by our afflictions.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's that
Yeah.
relatability. Right from the beginning, God lays in. God uses the the Israelis and Aaron's failure to build in this kind of relatability and grace and mercy
Hmm.
into this system he's
Right.
setting up.
Right. Yeah. He's a regular guy who struggles just like everyone else.
Yeah.
I love how the people ask Aaron, make us gods we can see and follow. Because I mean obviously this this is a whole new concept to them. You know, this
Right.
God they can't see. This, it's
Oh,
all been very
100%.
it's all been very pagan up until then. And we I don't know, I was gonna say we probably can't relate to it as much because we have faith in a God that we can't see. Um,
We've always
but
thought in those terms. They didn't. Well, I
right,
say that. We, all of us, I think we do the same thing today. We just see different things. We put faith in our career,
exactly.
or we take, that's probably where you're going.
Sure. But I just think it's such a human thing. I like that. I like that moment because I think, man, these people, they're tired, they're unsure. This guy's disappeared, Moses
Yeah.
disappeared, and they're like, my gosh, like Aaron, just give us something we can understand
Give us
and
something
what
to
they
hold
can.
on to.
Yes, and
$100.
they want something they can see and follow, and I think that's just the that those are the parameters that they understand
Oh,
it
and that's how
in
we
faith.
are. I mean, think about it.
I know.
We get shoved into
We do.
like a time of life,
Hmm.
like you're dealing with grief because your husband just dies, like
Hmm.
whatever, 6 months ago. And you're shoved out into this sea of uncertainty and all half of what we're doing is we're trying to grasp for something to hold on
Hmm.
to kind of just to find some semblance of stability because all the stability's been stripped out.
Yep.
Everything that we knew has been stripped away, and
Yeah.
in the face of that we just grab onto something that we can see and hold,
Hmm.
or that's the temptation anyway. And
Right.
the call from Jesus is, and that's what we see lived out when he's walking on the water and in the storm and the storms rage
Right.
around him and he calms the storm. What Jesus says is trust me anyway, even when it seems like everything is going to hell.
Hmm.
Believe anyway. And I think that's been God's, it was what he was saying the whole time. It was when
Hmm.
you read through the Hall of Faith, the reason that you have all these people represented, you have Abraham, you have Isaac, you have Jacob, you have Moses, and they're all, it says in Hebrews 12 that all of these were by faith.
I was going to say, explain to people listening who may not know what the Hall of Faith
Sorry.
means when you say that. That's okay. It's a term that I've heard before also. Um,
Well, in Hebrews, the writer
yeah.
of Hebrews, who we don't really know who it is,
Oh,
but
okay.
um,
We don't?
probably, No, we don't know who the author of Hebrews is.
Okay.
Um, he starts off talking about faith,
Hmm.
and he says, I'm assuming it's a he. The fundamental
Probably.
fact of existence is that this trust in God, this faith, is the firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. It's our handle on what we can't see. The act of faith is what distinguished our ancestors, set them above the crowd. So he starts off talking about faith, and then he starts going through what's commonly called the Hall of Faith. He says, by faith, we see the world called into existence by God's word, what we see created by what we don't see. By faith, Abel. By faith, Enoch. And he starts going through these stories of
Hmm.
people. By faith, Abraham. By an act of faith, Abraham said yes to God's call to travel to an unknown place that would become his home. When he left, he had no idea where he was going. Abraham did it by keeping his eye on an unseen city with real eternal foundations, the city designed and built by God. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And as you go through all these stories, you find that what what faith involved was getting a handle on the unseen.
Hmm.
And and the way we did that was through faith, and that's the way Abraham did it. It's the way Moses did it. It's the way
Hmm.
Jacob did it. And it's all the way through. And it's the way Stephen did it.
Right.
It's the way the disciples did it. It's the way the thousands of believers that were added at the day of Pentecost and subsequent preachings. It's the way that all believers do it. It's by faith.
Hmm.
Now that faith shows up. I'm not saying that it doesn't show up in fruit. It does. And you're going to know faith like James says, show me your faith without your works. I'll show you my faith with my works, right? It's a lot easier to show your so
Sure.
they are kind of working together, but it's that
Hmm.
faith kind of I think where it begins, and
Yeah.
that's what Stephen is trying to communicate to him, that you're accusing me that like you misunderstand the way the law and the prophets and the patriarchs, you misunderstand the story and all of it. You've heard it all and you know a lot of the facts,
Hmm.
but the story you know about it just isn't right. You're missing the most important thread, and that important thread is God. It's Jesus. I think. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hmm.
And it's now this is one where it doesn't end up, on the other times where we see, they preach and then they do whatever, or when they preach, when the disciples have preached, they've had thousands of people come to him. Well, this one, he preached an amazing sermon and got
Hmm.
stoned for his effort. So it doesn't
Right.
always go well, but we're going to find all the way through that um, this is, in fact, that how I've got some devotional readings from Eugene in
Hmm.
here. It says the blood that this is Eugene. This blood that was shed worked as seed in the world, and the church sprang out of it stronger, fuller, and more complete than at any point in that time. Most noteworthy, and this is what we'll get to. This is the to be continued that's hanging at the end of this passage
Okay.
when it says Saul was right there
Oh,
congratulating the
yeah. Oh
killers.
my gosh.
He says most noteworthy is the influence of Stephen's life on the life of Paul. It may well be that the church owes Paul to the prayer of Stephen.
Mm.
And so when you think about how that's widening out, you know what I mean?
Right. Oh, yeah. When you think of all that Paul wrote, and again, for those who don't know, Saul, who's mentioned at the end, becomes Paul when he converts.
It's pretty
So,
exciting.
and he
Next
wrote,
couple chapters, I think.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
we got
yeah. So
chapter
you
8, and
said
then in chapter 9, the story of Paul starts. Saul/Paul.
Saul/Paul. Well, like you said, he gave this great speech, but he did at the end call them murderers and traitors.
He didn't pull any punches.
Nope.
He wasn't worried about Bubba. He just let it fly,
No,
I
he was
think.
not worried about Papa. Oh gosh.
What I thought the whole time I was reading this is that Stephen is just like Jesus. Everything that's happening is just like what happened with Jesus. He he
Yeah, it
he
really
he
is.
showed them and exposed to them the reality of of the history of Israel
Hmm.
and God at work through all of it, and how Jesus is the culmination of all of that. And he got the same exact response, which was they hated him and killed him for it.
Right.
Like that was their response to the truth.
Gosh, it's really like, I mean, it's discouraging.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, what you're seeing is the last rejection, the final rejection of God and of Jesus by Israel. And within a few decades is when AD 70 hits and Israel will be no more. The temple will be
Um,
thrown down and it's plowed under, and there is no more, notwithstanding whatever Arab state wants to call itself Israel in 1948. There is
okay.
no future Israel.
Gotcha.
That's the whole point. It's
Yeah.
done. Natural Israel was plowed under and done, and
Hmm.
everything is spiritual Israel in the church. And the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God
Hmm.
is growing right now, and it's the church. God's
Yeah.
doing it right now in the world, in the church.
Gotcha.
That's some good
Mm.
Catholic doctrine for you, which it is kind of, I think, Catholic doctrine. I think they're mostly there, largely, somehow. Some whatever obstacle course they make you go through to figure that out. I think that's
Right.
kind of what they think.
An obstacle course. You know, you and I have talked about a revival among the youth
Hmm.
right now. And I wanted to tell you, I forgot about it till just now. When I was in the airport last weekend coming home, there was a family in front of me with a couple of look like daughters who had been at a very competitive volleyball tournament.
Oh,
They had like tournament backpacks and the
yeah,
name of their team.
like travel
But
teams and stuff.
exactly.
Hmm.
And here, I mean, we're in New Orleans, but clipped onto this girl's backpack right in front of me were these wooden clothespins, the old-fashioned
Yeah,
wooden clothespins that you pinch with the spring, and written on them were scripture
that's cool.
references. And I asked the dad about it. He says, "Oh yeah," he goes, "They trade them. They trade them and stuff. Like
Depending on
they,
what they're like struggling with or what's
sure,
speaking
yeah,
to
they
them or
clip
what.
them." I
That's
was
kind of
like,
cool.
it was so cool.
I
Yeah,
think
I
it's.
thought it
I
was
really
really
do believe
sweet.
that. From what I can see, I think that I think something. I think it's starting, and I think it's coming. Like, I
Hmm.
think the wave's building a little bit, and I think it's starting with young people.
Yeah, thought it was
So
nice.
I'm excited to see what's
Hmm.
happening. I'm excited with my own kids to watch. So you know what I mean? I watch,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
it's exciting. I think God's at work.
Yeah. And when I say this is discouraging, it's just discouraging back then to see that like this church that we know is filled with Jesus's true message. Just it's just discouraging to see someone like the at the beginning of it just be killed for it. I
Yeah,
mean, obviously, Jesus, we've we've heard the
right.
story of his
And he
death
said, "Pick up your cross and follow me." He said, "I
many,
mean, this
many
is
times.
this
Yeah,
is where it leads."
I guess so.
He said, "If the
So,
world hates me, it's going to hate you,"
hmm,
and they did. They do
yeah.
still.
So that aspect of it is discouraging, but it's also really beautiful that he sees God and he sees Jesus there. And I'm
Well, that's what I think is cool
sure that
because
spared him. Yeah, I'm
from a
sure that
worldly
spared him of
standpoint,
some of
we
the.
think of it and
Mhm.
we think, yeah, this is a little discouraging. I get that. I've always
Yeah.
thought that.
He just got stoned in the street by a mob.
But
That's
things are
terrible.
so upside down between us and
Right.
between God and the whole thing.
Hmm.
God and Jesus don't seem discouraged at all. They seem like this is awesome. Like they're so excited. They're
I
standing up like
know.
this is
That's
what
pretty.
this is the kingdom of God. This is what it is. And you read through the Gospels. That's what Jesus talks about. You know, blessed are you when they persecute you in my name.
Hmm.
When you have to give everything up for my name, like that seems to be the ultimate sacrifice.
Hmm.
And that Jesus is just like he couldn't be more pleased. Like that's
Right.
kind of the picture that I get of Jesus and God standing up together, just being like, like we get at like a concert or a
Right.
sporting event, or just as
But like,
excited
do you think
that
it's
to
because,
see the kingdom taken off in in
yeah.
in a person.
Do you think also they're, like you say, they're pleased? You think they're just pleased with Stephen for stepping up, like for rising to this occasion,
Yeah, I think they love it.
that he didn't back down, that he didn't say, all right, I'll
Well,
stop.
well, there's a verse that where Jesus says, and I can't think of where it's at right now. I'm,
Hmm.
I'm like Ted Cruz. I don't know where it's at. No, um,
I don't know.
I can't remember where it's at,
Yeah.
but he says, and when this happens to you, when they're
Hmm.
persecuting you, when they kill you, when they take everything from you,
Hmm.
he said, you can count on the fact that all of heaven is applauding you. And he said, give out a cheer because that's what they've always done to the people that I love, or like the
Oh,
people that
gotcha.
follow me. Is
Sure.
something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. That's cool.
It's in there somewhere.
Woo!
But yeah, it's a totally upside down thing. And that's what I
Right.
feel like. I feel like God and Jesus are standing up cheering for Stephen.
Hmm.
They're so excited about, like, because Jesus, you remember when the Roman centurion came to him, and he had his son, and he said,
Yes.
would you heal my son? And Jesus kind of goes back and forth with him. Then Jesus says, okay, I'll come with you. And he says, you don't have to come. If you, I'm a commander. I know if you say the word, it'll be done. And Jesus is taken back. And he says, I haven't seen this kind of faith anywhere in Israel. And there's this Roman Gentile expressing this. It was always when Jesus came across faith in this
Hmm.
really expressive, just like you'd almost call it irrational faith. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Like the woman who says, I just know
Yeah.
all I have to do is touch your robe and like that's going to be
He
enough. Is
always
that,
gets
yeah.
excited by finding strong faith. It's faith that seems
Hmm.
to excite Jesus and seems to excite God.
Hmm.
And when he sees somebody standing up and all hell is raining down on him, they're in faith, they almost don't even notice because they only have eyes for God. I just
Hmm.
can't imagine God getting more excited about anything.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it
that's
is.
cool.
I just yeah, that ending I think is real. For us, it's a downer from a worldly
Right.
standpoint, but
From a
heaven.
worldly
What's cool
standpoint.
about it is it's giving us a glimpse of the story and of
Hmm.
Stephen's death from heaven's standpoint, and that glimpse is
Right.
awfully encouraging.
Yeah. And like you said, that type of faith, the fact that it transcends like the world and it transcends the rational
Yeah,
and transcends what we can see and touch and all that. So, is that what you're talking
yeah.
about?
I just think
Yeah, it's got to be excited. Like, oh my gosh, they get it. They've like,
I think Jesus is like,
yeah,
this is what it's all about. This is it. This is the kingdom right
yeah,
here. You're watching
yeah.
it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And not just for Steve. It's like that for everybody. It's like that
Mm-hmm.
when we step out in faith and
Mm-hmm.
we take a risk on something and we step into it, and regardless of what happens from the world standpoint, whether they look at it as a fail, whatever happens, God's
Mm-hmm.
up there getting excited that we're willing to go
Yeah,
out on a limb for him. That's all he wants. Just go
yeah.
out on a limb for me. That's what I feel like that's the whole message of the gospel. You know what I
Got
mean?
it. Sure.
Like I went out on a limb and gave everything for you. Go out on a limb and give everything for me. That's
Mm-hmm.
how love works. That's that's knowing God. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? That's the
Yeah.
reality that underscores all of humanity. Anyway,
Cool.
I think we did pretty good. What do you think?
Oh
It
yeah.
was a
Good
it
job,
was a
Todd.
big chapter for us. Like it was a big attempt, and
It
I feel
was.
like
You
we
did
did okay
great.
with it.
You're trying to make up for our snail's pace of the Gospel
Mark.
of Mark. No, it
Well,
was. It
it's
made
just
sense
all
to keep this
together,
together. I know.
it's
I know.
one. He's This is Steven's answer, and I felt like
Right.
we need to get
Stephen was
through it.
kind of
So,
long-winded, and you didn't want to chop it in half.
right, you made some good points. It's amazing what Steven fit in there.
Yeah, yeah, true. He covered a lot pretty briefly.
For us, it
Real
seems
quick,
like a
because I,
long chapter, but if you think about how concise he was,
yeah, he covered thousands of years
yeah.
of history, right? Todd, I just want to make sure I didn't interrupt because you were talking about the cliffhanger at the end. Did you want to say anything more
No, I
about?
think
Oh,
we'll leave
okay.
it. There's just
Okay.
the thing with
You had
Paul, the thing with Saul gets exciting. So hang with us. We're going to find out
yeah.
what it is.
Yep.
And I think that I think that Jesus gets pretty excited about Paul too, which is weird.
Right?
God can use anybody. He used a murderer with Moses,
Yep.
right? And he's not done with Saul. Even though Saul's real excited congratulating the killers right now.
I know. He's like, "Good job, guys."
Let's see how
It's
this story
terrible.
goes. It's a great story.
It's terrible. The
I think Luke
ringleaders,
paces it really well too.
the ringleader. Yeah,
Like
you think
Luke's a
so?
good
He's a good
writer.
storyteller, good
Yeah, I think he's
storyteller.
a good storyteller. I really do. He does the same thing in the gospel. It's a good
Yeah.
he's a good storyteller.
So Saul's holding the coats of these people.
Yeah, he's
Got
watching
it.
everything for him.
Got it.
And then it says that Saul's right there congratulating the killers. You get the idea that he's kind of overseeing this whole thing.
Yeah.
and
Interesting.
and yeah, we're gonna see what comes of that. Why would we jump ahead, right? To be continued next
To
week.
be continued. Yep.
All right, guys. Carrie, thanks for joining me this week.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it. Can't wait to get back to it next week. Guys,
Yeah.
uh like us, subscribe, recommend us to friends, send it
Hmm.
out, and check out Wildly Opinionated News Hour if you have not. And we'll be back
No,
next.
we were gone, so we had some ground to make up,
Yeah.
ground to cover. You know what I'm
So
saying.
we did it. All right, guys. We'll catch you next week. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
See ya.